Mount Vesuvius, whose majestic flanks were once home to dense vineyards which yielded fine wines. This is the mountain that Bacchus preferred even to the beautiful hillsides of Mount Nysa, and the site on which the satyrs danced. And this was Pompeii, a town sacred to Venus and even dearer to her than Sparta itself. Over there stood Herculaneum, a town whose name reminds us of the legend of Hercules. Now it all lies buried beneath fire and burning ash, and the gods wish that it had not been within their power to commit such an act. With these heartfelt words, the poet Martial recounted the disaster that befell Pompeii and the lands around Mount Vesuvius on the 24th of August in the year 79 AD, when a cloud of smoke suddenly belched forth from the summit of Vesuvius, rapidly turning day to night, and wreaking death and destruction on nearby Pompeii, covering it beneath a blanket of incandescent stones and ash. In two famous letters to the historian Tacitus, Pliny the Younger left us a finely written description evoking this unforeseen and truly terrifying cataclysm in the greatest detail. He paints a masterly picture of the blackening skies, shrouded by the cloud of ash rising like a huge pine tree from the summit of the volcano. Those brief moments that characterize the onset and rapid completion of the terrible catastrophe are immortalized on the written page. He recalls the futile rescue attempts of the Praetorian fleet stationed at nearby Miseno, under the command of his uncle, Pliny the Elder, the renowned scholar and author of the famous Historia Naturalis. He also recounts the aid he himself tried to give to the inhabitants of the towns that had lived up until then in the protective shadow of Mount Vesuvius. However, all attempts were rendered fruitless by the ensuing tidal wave that made it impossible for ships to dock at Herculaneum. In a series of brief images, he recalls the disaster and the anxious and ultimately unsuccessful attempts of the local people to escape a terrible death. But it was all in vain. In the passing of a day and a night, the tragedy was complete. A fertile and fruitful region was plunged into darkness and devastated by the destructive force of the volcano. The commentary on Pompeii is not a flat account of the historical events regarding the volcanic eruption and the successive destruction of the town, but rather interprets the relationship between the inhabitants and the area they lived in, their religion, their institutions, culture, professions, and trade. The film then goes on to illustrate the topography of the area, the forum, the temples, theatres, shops, and places of worship. Here you can see some sequences of the Temple of Isis, interpreted according to the meanings of mystery that accompany the cult of the goddess. The sequences on the House of the Vetii illustrate all aspects of this monument: the opulence, customs, religion, architecture, and the role of landowners in Pompei society. The furnishings, fountains, statues, and floral decorations were rebuilt, and the ancient lead piping was restored. The famous frieze depicting the cherubs of the arts and sport, extravagant use of pictorial decoration drawing inspiration primarily from allegories and mythology. The fact that so much of the material for the heritage of Naples was filmed at more or less the same time has enabled us to make repeated cross-references to original relics kept at the National Archaeological Museum and at the Antiquarian Museum of the Mount Vesuvius area. The same considerations also hold for Herculaneum, Oplontis, the country houses, and the Phlegrean fields. The original statue of the faun from the Faun Villa in Pompeii is kept at the National Archaeological Museum. Another example is the mosaic depicting the battle between Alexander the Great and King Darius of Persia, which also came from the Faun Villa in Pompeii.